Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our talk, Unmasking MSC Files. And the reason why we decided to do this talk is because during the course of our work, we generally come across initial access vectors from APTs, right? And those are generally Word document files containing macros. Recently, they started using ISOs and LNKs. And just one note. And when you come across the MSC file, we were mind blown by the creativity and how enticing it was, right? Because if you think about it, Microsoft's Word, you have to open it, then there's a macro, you have to click through a warning, and then something happens, right? That was not the case at all with MSC, and specifically the second version of the weaponization of the MSC, which was the GRIM resource. So a little bit about myself. I'm Director of Advanced Threat Intelligence. I know it's a fancy title, but there's an explanation for it. I've been in the industry for 25 years, 9 of those, a little over 9, 10, working for Fortinet. And I'm focused right now on threat intelligence, research, hunting, and emulation. And I also partner with MITRE CTID, which is a very big part of my work, where we're looking at the threat landscape and understanding what tools, what methodologies and standards cyber defenders need to do their job in a frictionless way. I'm based out of Vancouver, Canada. And I work with this guy here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hossein Jazi, a senior threat intelligence specialist at Fortinet. My main responsibility and also my passion is tracking and monitoring cyber threat actors, especially nation-state ones. And as part of my APT research, I do threat hunting, malware reverse engineering. My favorite part is attribution. I love attribution. And yes, I do like blogging. I'm passionate about like publishing blogs on my research. And also recently, I've been interested in doing cybercrime. We were working with several groups to take down cyber criminals. Go.
So we're gonna, before we start talking about the weaponization and the campaigns, we're gonna talk a little bit about what MSC files are and weaponization. Does anyone know what MSC files are? How do they work? Okay, cool. So MSC files are Microsoft Saved Console files, right? So basically they are XML configuration files that are opened by this Windows, very old Windows utility called mmc.exe. If you ever use Regedit, Log Viewer, well, those are XML files, right? Those XML files contain something called snappings. Snappings are things that are defined inside the XML file that tap into CON modules within the Windows operating systems. So you define specific CLSIDs, which map back to COM modules within the Windows operating system. And through that, you can manipulate system structures like disk, registry key, logs, certificates, so on and so forth. So the basics, MMC, Microsoft Management Console. It's used for administrative tasks. You've all used it. MSC, it's the XML configuration file opened by MMC. And MMC uses snappings to open specific system components, right? So the exploitable components that were found to be was the ActiveX control-in snapping, which allows arbitrary loading of CON modules, link to web address snapping, which exploits the ability to, open up browsers and display HTML and JavaScript pages. And HTML can access external document active view class object, right? So the technique basically is about loading XML, an ActiveX object via MMC snapping, displaying the web page via link to web address, and then use JavaScript to get a reference to the XML object that called the link to web address, and trigger an XSLLT transform that will execute the JavaScript, right? So, and then you can execute shellcode via .NET, JScript, and using .NET to JScript to actually do the deobfuscating and conversion. So this all happens in memory bypassing endpoint defenses, right? So everything is executed inside the legitimate signed Windows binary. So this is a video. Can you guys play? So here we're just showcasing exactly how GRIM resource works. So this is a second technique, and it was called Grim Resource because every time you guys type regedit or certificate manager or log viewer, and this is a legitimate Windows use, and you click on that specific MSC file, it will prompt you a warning, right? It says, hey, you're about to deal with system structures, you know what you're doing, and then you say, yeah, okay, sure, I'm doing. And then you click OK. But in this case, you can see that, can you do it again? So I'm just opening up Notepad, loading the XML, which is .msc file. I'm highlighting the APDS DLL, which is used to do the exploitation. So you can see it's an XML file, it's an MSC file, and when I click, there's no warning, right? You just a pop-up box and calculator, right? So while researching a little bit on the Grim Resource injection, I realized that I'll say, okay, let's see how things work and how the DLLs are loaded. And then I figured out that the APDS.dll is quickly loaded and unloaded. Between 1 or 2 syscalls, it was green, then orange, and then red, and it disappeared from the address space. And I was like, okay, let's see how it shows up in other stuff. And then I'm using WinDebugger here, and I'm looking at the symbols table, at the log view, and I was like, whoa, it never appears there. So just keep that in mind. I'll explain that later. But depending on the way you're doing inspection of the process to see specific DLLs or understand how things are working on APDS, on your EDR or your rules, you might miss this.
Thank you. All right, in this section, I'm going to a little bit talk about different MSC weaponization methods that we have observed in the wild. So the first method, which is the most popular one and also the simplest one to implement, is abusing the console taskpad within the MMC console to run malicious commands. So it's pretty simple. A threat actor can create a malicious MSC file, and within the console taskpad, they can specify the command line like PowerShell, and then specify the command that they want to be executed using that command line tool. So when a user clicks the MSC file, the command is being executed in the background. Usually, they kind of open a decoy file to distract the user and add legitimacy to the operation. And this method is pretty simple to detect because it's a spawn PowerShell, and it's something that detection mechanisms are looking for. OK, this is the second method that Doug already mentioned about that. So this method is exploiting CV 2024-43572, which is a remote code execution vulnerability in MMC console, and specifically through a component called APDS.dll. So a threat actor can create a malicious MSC file and reference a vulnerable web browser within the APDS.dll, and specifically through a resource named redirect.html. So, yeah, so threat actors can create a malicious MSC file and then reference the JavaScript after redirect.html, and this leads to execution of the JavaScript using the eval function within the MMC console. So this method is more effective because everything is executed within the process of MMC, but still the URL is hard-coded, so it can be detected using a static mechanism, like static detection mechanism. So some threat actors started to obfuscate this URL to bypass a static detection mechanism. They hex-encoded the URL, but if you decode that, you would see this famous APDS URL. And the third method, which is the newest one, this method abuses the execute shell command method of MMC view object. So a threat actor can create a malicious MSC file that references a Shockwave Flash object inside the ActiveX ControlX object, which by default opens a web browser. and this web browser can load a remote control web page to execute the content of web page. So in order to this method to be successful, the threat actor needs to define usually two snapping. The first snapping is the reference to the remote URL, and the second one is the CLS ID, or ActiveX object. So you need to specify the second one if the first, like your URL contains the JavaScript. So if it's the URL contains the JavaScript, then you need to specify the MS-XML CLS ID, so it will be able to kind of execute the JavaScript inside the web browser. But in the simplest method, you also don't need to specify CLS ID, and you can use execute shell command function inside the web page, and that the content will be executed. This is very effective and can bypass static detection mechanisms too. So this slide shows the distribution of the methods we observed. The first method, the console dashpad, which we call it shadow MMC, is the popular one. 51% of samples using this method. The second popular method is the one that exploiting the vulnerability in APDS. Around 42% of the samples are using this method, and among them, only 5% use that obfuscation method I mentioned in the slide 13, I guess. And the third method is the less popular one because it's new, and I expect only 9% of samples use this method. We expect to see more APTs adopt this method in the future. I want to talk a little bit about a specific use case, and this is Larva 208. Larva 208 is a cybercrime, like financially motivated threat actor that has been active in past 2 years. They are doing kind of credential harvesting and also ransomware deployment. And in one of the latest operations, they used a vulnerability in MSC file called MSC Evil Twin. So this method, in this method, they define two MSC files, one benign, one malicious, both with the same name. They put the malicious one in a language-specific directory, and when they open the benign one, the MSC console tried to resolve MUI pass, and it automatically opened the malicious one and execute that malicious one. This malicious one is weaponized using the method tree I mentioned in the previous slide. So what's interesting is that we were able to track back the activities of this threat actor to May 2024, in which they started to use this method tree, adopt this method tree in their operations. And based on the MSC file name, we believe that they used this method tree first as their initial infection vector, and over time they adopted their methods to use more advanced methods like MSC Evil Twin. And I'm going to be a little bit more quick. In this section, I'll talk a little bit about different APTs that we observed using MSC file. And this slide shows the distribution of samples per APT. As you can see, 9 non-threat actors have used MSC files in their operations. The most active ones are Mustang Panda and Kimsuki. I use the popular name for threat actor. I know lots of talks about the threat actors naming, but I use the popular name. So as you can see, 34% of samples that we observed used by Mustang Panda, 22% by Kimsuki. This followed by some other threat actors like APT32, APT Bidder, and Mimiastic. And around 30% of sample, we weren't able to attribute them because we had limited evidences on the operation. This slide shows the distribution of the samples per month. So as you can see, everything started on April 2024. The very first operation was reported by researchers on April 2024, operated by Kimsuki. Since that time, we saw a steady increase in use of MSC files till September 2024, and majority of sample operations were operated by Kimsuki and Mustang Panda, but we observed that some of the threat actors like APT32 or Spaxia started to adopt this method since June 2023. Then we saw a steady gradual decrease since September 2024, and it reached to the lowest point, which probably we saw very less samples at the end of the year. But what's interesting is that we saw that like a gradual kind of resurgence of using MSC files in early 2025, and especially on April, that mostly Mustang Panda started to reuse MSC file in their operations. Most of the activities that we observed was like cyber espionage operation, especially targeting diplomatic organization and government. We saw very few cyber crime operations like Larva 208 and Radomantis, but mainly they were cyber espionage operation targeted. And these are some of the countries that have been targeted by this operation. This slide shows the different, usually MSC file is being distributed using different methods. So we observed 3 main methods to distribute MSC files. Some threat actors, such as Mustang Panda and Mimiastic, used HTML smuggling to distribute MSC files. So they embed a link to HTML file in the phishing email, and when you open the link, archive file is being downloaded that contains the MSC file. Some threat actors like Kimsuky and APTB there contains the link to an archive file into their operation, and specifically like when you download the archive file, it contains a malicious MSC file. And some threat actors like Erspectia, they directly attach the archive file that contains the MSC file in the phishing email. Usually threat actors try to disguise MSC file as a legitimate application, so they add add some icon in the MSC file. These are some of the icons that we observed they use for their MSC file. Some of them they pretend to be like documents or PDF file, and some of them pretended to be a legitimate application like Zoom application. And threat actors usually use MSC file to deploy their final payload, to perform their espionage operation, collect information, and these are some of the samples we observed at the end during the MSC infection was deployed. Some threat actors like Mustang Panda and Kimsuky use their own malware samples like Plugix and Blue Sharks, while some other threat actors like APT32, Mimiastic, and Erspectia focus on commercial or open source frameworks like Cobalt Strike or Silver framework. And just to wrap up this session, I just want to highlight the operations, some of the operations that we observe, and this is and show how an operation really works. So this is the first operation documented by security researchers on April 2024. It's the very first operation that used MSC files, and it was attributed to Kimsuky APT. So they try to target human activists in Facebook. They started to build trust, try to chat with them, and then when they gain the trust from the people, then they started to send a link to the people. The link, as I said, Kimsuky usually send a link to archive file, so they download the archive file. Archive file contains a malicious file, and then the command is being executed in the background. Usually they use console taskpad method in their operation. Then create a scheduled task, and eventually they deploy their final payload. And this is another operation used by operated by Kimsuky, and this is somehow similar in terms of TTPs, but this time they pretended to be an operation invitation to join a Zoom meeting. And what's interesting is that when you open, when the victims open the MSC file, they open a Zoom application, legitimate Zoom application, or ask you to install the Zoom application if you don't have the Zoom application to add legitimacy to the operation. And again, at the end, eventually they deploy their final payload. All right, Doug will talk about the remote AppDomain injection.
So together with the initial access vector for MSC files, what we found is that they are using another yet legitimate Windows binary to do further execution into the target, right? And that is AppDomain injection. And as we were researching the APT41 Orthodoxia attack, which was the first one we really identified this technique, we also saw that they were using the new type of AppDomain injection that was remote AppDomain injection. But first, what is AppDomain and what is the injection that is done using this Windows subsystem? So AppDomain is basically a sandbox where .NET DLLs can be loaded into a .NET process and do their thing and be supervised, right? So the AppDomain manager is the playground supervisor to make sure that the DLLs are not crashing and messing around within the main process address space. So the CLR calls on this manager within the .NET when the app boots up. It is deprecated and no longer used, and local AppDomain injection is somewhat older trick. Since 2020, MITRE has categorized this type of injection. And a lot of red teamers use this to this day. It's very effective. But the remote version was first spotted in August 2024, courtesy of APT41. So how does it work? Another XML file, so what they do is they basically, on the definition of before that, so the way AppDomain injection works is for every .NET executable within the directory that the .NET executable lives, if you do have a .config file with the same name of the executable, and that .config file is an XML in the format that the AppDomain manager is expecting, it's going to be looking at this XML to load assemblies, which is basically DLLs. And in this case, on this campaign, we saw that they were trying to load something out of a HTTPS URL, and it looks like a JPEG, but it's a DLL. And the kicker is a lot of the detections that could be done to detect this specific attack had to be done through ETW, right? So the kernel logging of processes. But to attacker's surprise and mine, you can actually disable it from the XML file. Nice, eh? So the only roadblock to actually loading remote DLLs is that they need to be signed. But everyone can sign a DLL. All you have to do is go into Visual Studio, create a key pair, compile your DLL, and then just sn -tp, and your DLL is loaded. This load is signed, and it can be loaded remotely. So over the course of our work, Hossein does the hunting, we do the research together, and I try to inoculate the threat so we can execute it against the whole host of Fortinet portfolio to see what are the detection opportunities, right? So this is just the emulation of the one SVC, and as you can see, the JPEG is being loaded there. And if you're trying to emulate this, I spent a few days trying to figure this out because the information on the internet is kind of here and there. But there is the namespace needs to match. It's so hard to see here, but so the namespace needs to match the AppDomain manager type, and then there's a dot, and then the sealed class needs to match the AppDomain injection. And if you're loading remotely, you had to have the public key token, which needs to be referenced in two places in the XML file. So if you're trying to see if your security tooling is able to detect this, give it a shot. I would highly recommend it because we're seeing this being paired with MSC more and more. So a little bit on the detection opportunities, because this is why we do what we do. Some caveats on MSC injections. So as we've seen, a lot of these MSC tricks are still popping up. If you're trying to detect those using arrow rules, they will be bypassed because, as we've seen, there's now an obfuscation way to do the APDS. And then there's a new way to actually do the loading of binaries and code, which is Grim Resource++. So it has to be a holistic response, right? And a lot of the Sigma rules that are out there, they're too focused on system spots. They say, okay, if this is executing outside system 32, yeah, flag it. But if the attacker already has admin rights to your machine, he can just put something on System32, and then, so the Sigma rules will snooze, right? It runs inside a legitimate Windows proxy binary, so yeah. No child processes are executed via non-standard way. And one thing that I've told you right in the beginning is that the APDS DLL is loaded via non-standard method, right? So the DLL is being quickly mapped and unmapped, and it's very short-lived, right? It only lasted a little bit because I was stepping through the debugger, right? So I could see it. So depending on how your security tooling detects loading of DLLs, you might miss it. So keep that in mind. So I started doing a little bit of research, like, okay, why is it quickly loaded and loaded? It doesn't make any sense. It's just one of those things that helps the attacker a lot, and it's just unexpected. It's like, oh, nice, right? So when a DLL is being mapped into the process space of a process, on Process Explorer, the colors mean something, right? So green means it's being initialized and the main function has been called. Orange means that the DLL has been mapped, but the DLL has not been not called. And red means it's being unmapped, right, with ZW unmapped view or section. So it only happens because of the way that APDS DLL is being called by the MMC process, right? So it's just trying to evaluate a JavaScript statement, right? So it's just loaded and unloaded quickly. So it's just another win for the attackers, I guess. So on MSC injection, the detection opportunities, the best detection strategies that I found is setting up ETWs to look for suspicious DLL loads, spotting DLLs, other DLLs like JavaScript, JScript, VBScript, or MSXML3 loading can tip you off. Look for quirky temp HTML file named redirect in the inet cache folder, which is the calling card for the APDS XSS execution. MMC network activity or spawning processes, that's an easy win. Or if you're trying to detect the payload itself, not the behavior on the machine, look for embedded CLS IDs or URLs, JavaScript or links, but those can be deobfuscated, right? When we're going to the behavior part, JavaScript making ActiveX calls from MMC context, and any use of external document active view control objects, because that means you're loading an external page and trying to do something with it, not just display. So AppDomain injection, detection opportunities. It's a little bit complicated, this one, because Sysmon rules and other tools miss CLR injection. So it will only show up on ETW's consumers just after the fact. If ETW hasn't been disabled, it easily is disabled, and it generally is. So spotting loaded assemblies in the event tracing for Windows works, but attackers can disable, as in the XML. And Adam Chester actually had another more complicated way of identifying the DLL within the process space that does the ATW reporting, because it is done from the process space itself, and just patching that. So it's just disabled, right? So the best detection hacks that I found for AppDomain injection is a little bit trickier, but it's looking for a white copy execution protection within the address space. And if you find a memory region that has WCX, try to look for syscalls that do deobfuscation, thread manipulation, and memory handling. That can tip you off. I am 1 minute before my time, so a little more time for questions, I guess.
Thank you. So any questions, then please step up to the mics. Nope. I think you were pretty much crystal clear, right?
Everybody got everything, right? Good.
I said this actually brought up a lot of memories.
That's good, that's good.
From back in the days. And it's awesome work.
Thank you.
We need more of that. It's sharing is caring, always, right? So thank you all for attending, and then don't forget the evaluations.